At 04:17 a.m. on October 3, 2025, the USS Ronald Reagan, a 100,000-ton Nimitz-class aircraft carrier worth $6.2 billion and carrying 5,000 sailors and 90 aircraft, was conducting routine flight operations in the Philippine Sea, 340 miles east of Taiwan. The carrier was operating as part of Carrier Strike Group 5, protected by 4 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, 2 Ticonderoga-class cruisers, and 1 Virginia-class attack submarine, the most sophisticated naval defense network in the world. At 04:17:34, a Chinese Type 093 Shang-class nuclear attack submarine, operating at 400 meters depth and maintaining complete radio silence, achieved firing solution on the American carrier. Range: 8,000 yards. Target speed: 12 knots. Course: steady. The Chinese submarine's captain, Captain First Rank Jiang Wei, had been tracking the carrier for 6 hours, threading through the escort screen by exploiting thermal layers in the ocean that masked his submarine's acoustic signature. At 04:17:47, he gave the order that would bring 2 nuclear powers to the edge of war. Fire Tube 1. A U-6 heavyweight torpedo, 530 cm in diameter, weighing 1,150 kilograms with a 250 kilogram high-explosive warhead, ejected from the submarine's torpedo tube and began its run toward the USS Ronald Reagan. Speed: 65 knots. Estimated time to impact: 4 minutes, 12 seconds. The torpedo was not a drill. It was not a warning shot. It was a live weapon, armed and programmed to destroy the largest warship in the U.S. Pacific Fleet. And for the next 4 minutes, the crew of the Ronald Reagan would face the most terrifying scenario in naval warfare: a torpedo in the water, closing fast, with nowhere to run and seconds to react. This is the story of the attack that almost started World War III. The Chinese torpedo that came within 200 meters of sinking an American aircraft carrier, and the 6 hours of crisis management that kept 2 nuclear powers from pulling the trigger. If you're here for naval warfare analysis and the classified incidents that define modern military confrontation, hit subscribe on Navy Warfare right now. And comment below: if the torpedo had hit, should the U.S. have declared war on China immediately? The Type 093 Shang-class submarine is China's most advanced nuclear attack submarine. At 351 feet long and displacing 6,000 tons submerged, it's smaller than American Virginia-class boats, but significantly quieter than previous Chinese submarines. It's powered by a pressurized water reactor providing virtually unlimited range. The submarine carries 6 503-meter torpedo tubes and can fire a variety of weapons, including U-6 torpedoes, wire-guided, active, passive homing weapons, with ranges up to 50 kilometers at high speed or 65 kilometers at lower speed. Intelligence assessments suggest the Type 093 is still louder than U.S. submarines, but quiet enough to operate effectively in the Western Pacific. And on October 3rd, one of these submarines had penetrated a U.S. Carrier Strike Group's defensive screen, something that should have been impossible. The USS Ronald Reagan's anti-submarine defenses are layered and comprehensive. 4 destroyers equipped with AN/SQQ-89 sonar suites, towed array sonars, and SH-60 helicopters with dipping sonar and sonobuoys. 2 cruisers with similar systems. 1 Virginia-class submarine specifically assigned to screen ahead of the carrier and detect threats, and the carrier itself with AN/SQS-53 hull-mounted sonar. This network creates an acoustic barrier that enemy submarines should not be able to penetrate undetected. But Captain Zhang had exploited a weakness. The Philippine Sea, with its complex thermal layers created by warm surface water and colder deep water, creates acoustic shadows where submarines can hide. By staying deep, moving slowly, and using the terrain features of undersea ridges, the Chinese submarine had approached to firing range without triggering detection. At 04:19:03, 76 seconds after the torpedo was fired, the USS Ronald Reagan's AN/SQS-53 sonar detected the incoming weapon. The sonar operator, Petty Officer 2nd Class Marcus Webb, saw the contact appear on his display. A high-speed object, acoustic signature consistent with a torpedo, bearing 285 degrees, range 6,400 yards, closing at 65 knots. He grabbed his microphone and transmitted the alert that every sailor dreads. Torpedo in the water! Torpedo in the water! Bearing 285, range 6,000 yards, high-speed screws. On the bridge, Captain Richard Morrison, the carrier's commanding officer, felt ice in his stomach. A torpedo. Incoming. At the carrier. This wasn't a drill. This was real. All ahead flank, hard right rudder, sound collision alarm, launch countermeasures. The Ronald Reagan's 4 massive turbines, each producing 65,000 horsepower, surged to maximum power. The carrier, which normally cruised at 20 knots, accelerated toward 30 knots, its maximum speed. But accelerating a 100,000-ton ship is like accelerating a skyscraper. It takes time. Precious time the crew didn't have. The rudder swung hard right, and the carrier began a ponderous turn. Slowly. Too slowly. The torpedo was covering 120 feet per second. The carrier was turning at maybe 1 degree per second. The math was brutal and simple. The torpedo would arrive long before the evasive maneuver could create meaningful separation. Launch acoustic countermeasures, now! Subscribe to Navy Warfare for anti-torpedo tactics and the technology that protects carriers from underwater threats. And tell us, can a 100,000-ton ship actually dodge a torpedo? The Ronald Reagan carried AN/SLQ-25 Nixie-towed torpedo decoy systems, acoustic noisemakers towed behind the ship designed to lure torpedoes away from the carrier by mimicking its acoustic signature. But the Nixie system takes time to deploy, time the crew didn't have. The torpedo was already too close. The carrier also had Mk3 acoustic device dispensers, canisters that could be launched from the ship to create acoustic confusion in the water, hopefully decoying the torpedo. At 04:19:08, 5 seconds after detection, 2 Mk3 devices splashed into the water ahead of the carrier's projected path. But the U-6 torpedo was designed to defeat exactly these countermeasures. Its guidance system combined passive acoustic homing, listening for the target's sound, with active sonar pinging. If it lost the target in acoustic clutter, it would go active, sending out sonar pulses and homing on the returns. At 04:20:14, the torpedo passed through the acoustic countermeasures and continued tracking the carrier. Range 3,200 yards. Time to impact 90 seconds. Throughout the carrier, alarms wailed. 5,000 sailors rushed to damage control stations. Watertight doors slammed shut, sealing compartments. In the hangar bay, aircraft were chained down. On the flight deck, ordnance crews secured weapons. Everyone braced for impact. In the carrier's Combat Information Center, Captain Morrison watched the tactical display. The torpedo symbol crept closer to the carrier symbol at the center of the screen. He'd done everything he could. Maximum speed, hard turn, countermeasures deployed. Now it was up to physics and luck. At 04:20:47, 33 seconds before estimated impact, something changed. The torpedo's acoustic signature shifted. Its speed dropped slightly. The weapon had lost solid contact with the carrier, possibly confused by the countermeasures, possibly affected by the carrier's turn, creating a larger cross-section of acoustic returns. The U-6's guidance computer did what it was programmed to do. It went active. The torpedo's sonar began pinging, sending out acoustic pulses and listening for returns. But active sonar is a double-edged sword. It provides accurate targeting information, but it also makes the torpedo detectable to the target's sonar. Torpedo has gone active, bearing 278, range 1,500 yards. 1,500 yards, less than a mile. At 65 knots, the torpedo would cover that distance in 42 seconds. On the bridge, Captain Morrison made a decision that probably saved his ship. Emergency full astern on engines 3 and 4. Maintain flank on 1 and 2. It was an unconventional maneuver, running 2 engines in reverse while keeping 2 in forward. The result would be massive stress on the propulsion system, potentially causing damage. But it would also do something critical. It would create turbulence in the water behind the carrier, churning up thousands of bubbles that would reflect sonar and confuse the torpedo's guidance. At 04:21:19, 10 seconds before the torpedo would have reached the carrier's projected position, The weapon passed down the starboard side of the ship at a distance of 200 meters, less than 220 yards. Close enough that sailors on the flight deck could see the torpedo's wake through the darkness, a phosphorescent trail cutting through the water parallel to the ship. The torpedo continued past the carrier, its guidance system confused by the turbulent water, unable to reacquire the target. At 04:21:37, its fuel exhausted, the weapon safety system activated, and the warhead detonated at a depth of 50 meters. The underwater explosion was massive. A 250-kilogram warhead creates a bubble of superheated gas that expands and collapses in milliseconds, generating a shockwave that travels through water at 5,000 feet per second. Even at 200 meters distance, the shockwave hit the carrier with tremendous force. The ship shuddered. In the hangar bay, aircraft shifted on their chains. On the flight deck, sailors were knocked off their feet. Below the waterline, hull plates flexed from the pressure wave. Welds cracked. Rivets popped. And in the engineering spaces, damage control teams rushed to inspect for flooding. But the carrier held. The hull integrity remained intact. No flooding. No casualties. The Ronald Reagan had survived. At 04:22, while damage control teams assessed the ship, the carrier's escorts went on the offensive. The 4 destroyers, now fully aware that a hostile submarine had just fired on the carrier, activated their active sonar systems and began prosecuting the contact. The Chinese submarine, having fired its weapon, was now in maximum danger. The moment the torpedo launched, it had revealed its position. Active sonar from 4 destroyers converged on the area, creating a sonobuoy basket of acoustic coverage that made hiding impossible. At 04:24, the destroyer USS Fitzgerald achieved solid sonar contact on the Chinese submarine at 12,000 yards, depth 400 meters, speed 15 knots, heading west, fleeing toward Chinese territorial waters. Con sonar, we have solid contact. Designate Master 1. Classification: Chinese Shang-class submarine. The Fitzgerald's captain immediately prepared to engage. His ship carried 20 Mach 46 torpedoes in vertical launch ASROC cells, anti-submarine rockets that could deliver torpedoes to the target location in minutes. One command, and the Chinese submarine would be under attack. But before he could fire, a flash message came from 7th Fleet Commander. Hold fire. Do not engage. Repeat. Do not engage. Maintain contact and track. The political calculus had changed. If the U.S. destroyed the Chinese submarine, it would be an act of war. The Chinese could claim their torpedo was a warning shot, an accident, a malfunction. But if the U.S. killed 107 Chinese submariners in retaliation, there would be no walking it back. At 04:31, 14 minutes after firing the torpedo, the Chinese submarine crossed into Chinese territorial waters and disappeared into the acoustic clutter of the shallow Taiwan Strait. The U.S. destroyers, prohibited from entering Chinese waters, lost contact. The immediate crisis was over, but the diplomatic crisis was just beginning. At 05:15, the White House Situation Room was briefed on the incident. The President, surrounded by the Secretary of Defense, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and National Security Advisor, faced an impossible question. How do you respond to an attack that almost sank a carrier but technically missed? China had not acknowledged the incident. No communication, no explanation. The Chinese submarine had simply disappeared back into its home waters. The U.S. had 3 options. First, publicly accuse China of attacking a U.S. carrier and demand explanations, risking escalation. Second, retaliate militarily against Chinese naval assets, which would certainly trigger war. Third, handle the incident through back-channel diplomacy, keeping it classified while delivering ultimatums in private. They chose the third option. At 07:23, the U.S. ambassador to China delivered a classified démarche to the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The message was simple: acknowledge the incident privately, guarantee it won't happen again, and punish those responsible, or face public exposure and military consequences. China's response came 6 hours later. Through back channels, Chinese officials claimed the torpedo firing was accidental, a weapons malfunction during a training exercise that caused an inadvertent launch. The submarine captain had been immediately relieved of command upon returning to port. The incident was deeply regretted, and measures were being implemented to prevent recurrence. It was a lie, and both sides knew it. The torpedo had been deliberately fired, but the lie gave both nations a way to de-escalate without losing face. The incident remained classified until December 2025, when investigative journalists obtained leaked documents proving that a Chinese submarine had fired on the Ronald Reagan. The story broke internationally, triggering congressional hearings and public outrage. But by then, the crisis had passed. The submarine captain, who U.S. intelligence believed had been acting on orders from Chinese Naval Command, had disappeared from public view, likely imprisoned or executed. The Type 093 submarine involved had been restricted to port, and Chinese submarines had not approached U.S. carriers that closely since. The Ronald Reagan underwent repairs at Yokosuka Naval Base for 3 weeks. Hull damage from the shockwave required welding and reinforcement. But the carrier returned to operational status and continued its deployment. For Captain Morrison and his crew, the incident was a permanent reminder of how close they'd come to disaster. A torpedo that missed by 200 meters, 4 minutes from detection to detonation, and a maneuver that probably saved 5,000 lives by creating just enough turbulence to confuse a weapons guidance system. Now I want 3 perspectives from you. First, should the United States have destroyed the Chinese submarine immediately after it fired, or was restraint the correct decision? Second, was this an unauthorized attack by a rogue submarine captain, or were they following orders from Chinese Naval Command? Third, if the torpedo had hit and sunk the carrier, how should the U.S. have responded? Conventional retaliation or nuclear escalation? Comment your detailed strategic analysis below. Your insights drive the conversations we have on Navy warfare. And if this breakdown of the torpedo attack that almost sank a carrier gave you new understanding of undersea threats, prove it by hitting that like button, subscribing to Navy Warfare, and turning on notifications. Because when a torpedo is in the water closing at 65 knots, the margin between survival and catastrophe is measured in meters. Until next time, stay informed, stay tactical, and remember, in naval warfare, the most dangerous attacks are the ones you don't see coming.